everybody, I'm James and this is my all-new second YouTube channel where I'll be taking you behind the scenes of my main channel, JayEmm on Cars, and also doing a little bit of the stuff that I really do enjoy but can't really make on a channel called JayEmm on Cars. In other words, stuff about movies, hi-fi, cooking, and whatever really takes my fancy. In today's video, I am taking my 2013 Ferrari F12 Berlinetta to its service, and I'm going to be discussing how it is I came to own this vehicle despite not planning to buy one for quite some time, how I've been getting on with it, what's gone wrong, what my friend and new channel partner, Mr. Anthony Marcano, thought of it when I left it with him for a few days, and how much it's likely to cost me in the next month. If, like myself, you're a fan of a naturally aspirated V12 Symphony, please fill your boots because this is likely to be the last time I hear this car for a little while. So, let's get started. If you are already a regular subscriber to my main channel, a lot of the next section of this video you've probably already heard, in which case you'll want to skip ahead to this timecode or the next chapter. However, if you're new here, thank you for joining me, and in either case, because this is an all-new channel, I would really ask you, if the stuff I've told you about sounds like your sort of thing, please hit that subscribe button. At this early stage, it's super important to get those subscriber numbers up. It makes a huge difference to any channel, but a small one doubly so. Alrighty then, the Ferrari. I already owned two Ferraris, lucky chap that I am. A 1999 550 Maranello and a 2008 430 Scuderia. The Maranello is a classic Grand Tourer, beautiful manual gated old school V12. The 430 is a much racier, more aggressive car, stripped out interior, hardcore F1 gearbox. It's a riot. So the two are very different, and I have a very strict rule that any car going on the driveway has to do something a little bit differently to those I already own. It isn't that I didn't want an F12, far from it. I've always thought these were a seriously cool car. But the fact is, one of them was simply too much money. Before I owned this car, I'd actually driven an F12 on only two separate occasions. When I reviewed one about 2 years ago, which happened to be the very same car, and when I test drove one down at Meridien Modena, which is where we're heading today, a few months before. In theory, this really is the car more suited to my needs because I like taking all my cars abroad. In fact, it's more or less a ritual for me to take my cars up to Scotland, and generally speaking, I'll do about 2,000 or 3,000 miles in the space of 2 weeks. That is a great opportunity not just to enjoy your car on some fantastic roads, but also to really get a feel for it. And that way, if ever I do sell a car, I can always say, yep, I've had my fun, I've done my piece with it, I've taken it to Scotland, I have driven it likely more than many other owners will. When I reviewed this car, it was on its original Pirelli P0s, and I was driving unfamiliar roads. So I think it's fair to say that my overall takeaway was it was an impressive car, incredibly beautiful, very well put together, but not one that really spoke to me. The second time round, when I test drove one at Meridien Modena, it was quite a different looking car, probably closer to how, if you ask me, I would say I'd want one. So it was in Tour de France blue, had some really gorgeous options, a nice interior. In fact, the only thing really it was missing was the racing seats, which I would prefer and would have over these, though the regular ones are still very nice. But again, the roads just weren't right for this kind of car. All of the roads around Meridien Modena, which is in the south of England in an area called the South Downs, are just not very well suited to any kind of sporty driving, certainly not in a car with over 700 horsepower. So I drove the car and was just underwhelmed. I looked at it, and in the showroom it's absolutely stunning and you really, really want it, but let's be honest here, with the amount of money that we're talking about, and that car was £165,000, you've got to really desperately need it. The 430 Scuderia, by the time I'd even sat in it, I'd said, yeah, no, this is the car. This is the one that stands out. I wanted a supercar, which this isn't, and the 430 is. So at the time, I was very, very happy with that decision. Fast forward the clock a little bit, and I found myself once again able to buy something new. Didn't have quite the same amount of budget, but I was looking at my options, and I figured I could get something in the sort of 70 to 80,000 pound mark. At the time, I had a Maserati Quattroporte, which was my daily driver, and my thinking was to go and buy an Aston Martin V8 or V12 Vantage. I absolutely love those cars. Every time I review one, I have a great time, and every time I buy something else, I think, why didn't I just go and buy an Aston? The truth is that usually the Astons have either been too expensive or too impractical for my needs, but I found myself in a situation where I thought, I can afford to buy a car that doesn't need to do everything, and the Aston would really be a cool choice. Never owned an Aston before. I know my audience are interested in Aston content, so it all seemed to make sense. I began looking at a few cars, and unfortunately many of them weren't in the condition that I would have hoped, but the search continued. However, as I was doing that, I bumped into a Ferrari FF. That's the four-seater one that's kind of related to this, has a similar engine in it, and has been on Top Gear and Harry's Garage and all sorts of places. They are quite divisive because of their looks. Another friend of mine had owned one. He'd had a few issues with it, but it was a seriously cool car. In terms of list price, the car that I found was actually more than the Aston Martins. However, because of the poor residuals on the Astons, the Ferrari actually worked out quite a bit cheaper in terms of finance. The particular car that I found also happened to have an amazing history. It was on higher miles, 60,000, which as Ferraris go is essentially taxi mileage, but it was the original Ferrari press car, so it had featured in things like the Harry's Garage video, and that meant although it was on higher miles, it should have been very well maintained, certainly while Ferrari had it. I did a deal to buy that car subject to inspection, and as I was going to then be buying a four-seater rather than a two-seater, it dawned on me that having the Maserati as well was simply superfluous, and I could essentially free up all the money I needed for the FF if I just sold the Mazda. A deal was done to sell that car to a good friend of mine, and I thought, yes, problem solved, this is fantastic. I'm now going to have three Ferraris, one V12 two-seater, one V8 two-seater, and a V12 four-seater. What could be better? Sadly, that car turned out to need a lot of work, so the deal fell through, and I found myself with no sensible four-seater at all. Whether you could really call a Maserati Quattroporte a sensible four-seater or not is, I accept, up for debate. And that's when the idea came to me to consider buying an F12. An idea I can say I haven't really regretted. You see, one of the other factors that had previously stopped me buying an F12 was the fact that many of them are still on fairly low mileage. And that meant, simply put, if I bought one and did what I normally do with my cars, i.e. drive it, I would lose a lot of money. I'm not averse to the idea of spending money on cars. I know that a Ferrari V12 is not going to be a particularly cheap thing. However, I do have to draw the line somewhere, and the fact is, if I was going to buy one of these with, say, 6,000 or 7,000 miles on the clock and then double that mileage, yeah, sure, 6,000 or 7,000 doesn't really seem like a lot. For many cars, that would be average annual mileage. But in something like this, that could mean I would be losing 10 to 20,000 pounds just in depreciation, and I didn't want to do that. Happily, Guy, the owner of this, had been using his car fairly frequently, so it had over 20,000 miles on it when I picked it up. In fact, closer to around 22.5. I also knew that it had been a generally very well-behaved example and had given him little to no trouble in the time that he'd had it. There were some issues with the car, though they're chiefly cosmetic. I'll talk you through those in a bit. He'd replaced the tyres, the old Pirellis were out, and in came a new set of Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's, which he said transformed the way the car drove, and having now experienced it myself, I can confirm. This car now grips better in the wet than it did in the dry on the Pirellis. Because of the small issues that it had and the fact I was a friend, he was happy to do me a deal on the car because he wouldn't need to pay commission to a dealer. So I took the numbers to my finance company, ran them, and it turned out that the monthly payment on this would have been less than had I bought the FF and not sold the Maserati. So I said to them, well, surely if they were happy for me to have the FF and the Maserati, I'd never said that I was going to sell the Mazda, that they would be happy for me to have this. Sound logic, right? As it turned out, yeah, it was sound logic. They were happy. So a deal was done, and then I found myself being the owner of 3 Ferraris, which is nice, and certainly not something I'd anticipated happening. I'm still not really over the fact I have any Ferraris at all, but I was always the sort of person that said if I found myself in the luxurious position of being able to own cars like this, I would make sure that they were used and appreciated, and that I've done. So the car has been up to Scotland on the cursory journey. I've used it as my daily driver on occasion. I've taken it to the shops. I've even taken it around the track very briefly at Snetterton, and overall I've had an enormous amount of fun. The F12 is a car that takes some time to come alive, and I'll discuss that more when my friend Anthony joins me in a bit. The experience, I would say, has exceeded expectations. I love the noise that it makes. I'm not so much a fan of how much it drinks to make that noise. I did my fuel calculations and I worked out when being driven gently, this car is not even doing 16 to the gallon. Driven properly, you really don't want to know. Ferrari, as far as I'm aware, have never put an economy gauge in their cars, and to be honest, that is for very, very good reasons. You simply don't want to know. On the trip to Scotland, I would estimate, and this is at slightly older and less devastating fuel prices, I did around £1,000 in fuel alone. Luckily, they were very, very enjoyable miles. The car has an amazing spread of power and torque all through the rev range, and it spins to just shy of 9,000. It's an incredible thing. The brakes are also pretty decent, but another item I'm going to be addressing today. The real highlight for me though is the steering. The first time I drove this car, I thought the steering was actually pretty poor. That may have been the tyres, perhaps the roads, or a combination, but having now driven it, it's actually one of the best things about this car. It's got a really beautiful weighting with plenty of texture coming through it, and it's one of the last Ferraris to have hydraulic steering. It's also the last Ferrari to be styled in conjunction with Pininfarina, which is one reason why I, and many others, feel that it's a little bit prettier than its successor, the 812. It is also massively practical, has that big boot at the rear, which means if you want to go on a big trip, it's actually really well suited. In fact, that's something common to all of the Ferraris I've had. Even the 430 has a really good amount of boot space in it compared with pretty much all the other supercar rivals. An Audi R8, for example, you would expect to be the more practical, usable supercar, but is in fact much more compromised. It's even very comfortable. You can set the car to sport or race, then hit the famous bumpy road mode button, the suspension backs off, and it is a genuinely enjoyable car. The ride quality, I think, is actually superior to even a few Bentleys and things that I've driven. It's genuinely that good. They're not quite McLaren brilliant, I will confess. Of all the Ferraris I've been lucky to own, it's the thirstiest, and it also has the smallest fuel tank, 92 litres, which apparently was important to be able to make it as practical as it is, but it's even smaller than the one in the 430, that's 95, and the one in the 550 is well over 100 litres. That means that in practice, this can sometimes only go half as far between fill-ups as even the 550, and that's to say nothing of normal cars. Just in case you are new to me on YouTube as a whole and you haven't seen much of my other content, I did a video that I personally quite enjoyed with this car up in Scotland earlier in the year, and if you like a little bit of automotive top shelf material, I'd highly recommend giving that a watch. That all I think brings you reasonably up to date with the car, so the next step is to go and put some more fuel in it, then grab Anthony.
Good morning, James.
Morning.
How are we?
Good, thanks.
Right, ready to hit the road?
Ready.
Let's do this. He says you can't fit loads of stuff in a Ferrari.
It's super practical.
Very practical.
this is not the first time that Anthony has actually driven the F12.
Well, let's just say there was a little surprise waiting for me one day.
So basically, I've been wanting Anthony to drive the car for absolutely ages, and I'd offered him the chance to drive it, but understandably he'd said, look, very valuable car, don't really want to do it without the proper insurance.
I'm not so much worried about me. I'm pretty confident that I won't crash the car. I'm more worried that an uninsured driver crashing into the car would mean that we're screwed.
I hatched a plan, as he'd been so supportive and helpful to me, of secretly putting him onto my insurance policy so that he could drive it. If you want to see exactly what happened when I first threw him the keys, please check out the video. But I said to people earlier on that this is one of these cars that you don't really just hop into and get a feel for. So we then got a second opportunity for Anthony to drive the car when I completely screwed up and I curbed the hell out of one of the alloy wheels. So the car went off to a company called Whoops Wheel Fix It, and that's when the alloys changed from silver to gold. So Whoops Wheel Fix It was a little bit closer to Anthony than it was to me. I was busy, the car needed collecting, so I said to him, now you are on my insurance policy, why don't you go and grab it? And how did you get on second time round?
Oh mate, so much better. The first time I was like, there's so many things going on. The steering wheel, it's got so many buttons on it, nothing is where you expect it to be. You know, I wanted to use the indicators and ended up changing gear and, you know, the usual. And at that time, your video on how to get your head around a Ferrari steering wheel hadn't yet been released. So I didn't have the benefit of watching that. And speaking of the steering, it's so fast. Unbelievably fast. Like it's like a good 20 to 25% faster than even most typical sports cars in my experience.
Yeah, you know, I've been driving the 430 for the last couple of days, and by comparison, the steering rack in that is so slow, and that's already faster than a normal 430 rack. So yeah, you drive this for a bit and you get used to it, and then you get into other cars and you just start getting annoyed at why aren't they more like this?
Yeah, honestly, if I could change my cars to have the steering like this, I would. The most intimidating thing is the amount of power going through the rear wheels. Like my R8 has got 560 horsepower, mostly through the rear wheels, but some through the front. This has got an extra 200 or so horsepower going through just the rear wheels, and it is quite intimidating. Also, the other thing is that obviously in the R8, when it does start to rotate, you're sitting kind of just forward of the middle of the car. Whereas in this, you're sitting slightly back from the middle of the car, so you're moving more when the back end does step out. I eventually got the lights on the steering wheel all the way to the top, but it took me about 2 good solid days of driving around in it before I could even do that, and I still haven't put my foot on the floor.
I had the same thing, you know, because when I got this car, it was end of February, so weather was a little bit inconsistent. You're obviously massively respectful of all the power it has, the fact it's 2-wheel drive, all the stories you hear about it, all the pictures you see of people that have put their foot down and got it wrong and everything else. And oh, it took me a long time. And then, would you believe it, I actually thought for a bit that the car wasn't actually that quick. And then I realized it's because the weather was so poor and the traction control is really quite sophisticated, you didn't ever notice it bleeding the power away. And then eventually, when I managed to get some roads that I knew, the weather was right, it dried out, it warmed up, like, and the tires could hook up, and I put it in race mode, which just allows that little more slip before the traction control intervenes. Like, oh my word, it's devastatingly fast, like, but fun.
Yeah, when I finally built up the courage to put it into race mode, I was like, ah! But it is amongst the most fun I've had in the car. The other thing I would say that's really interesting about it is, even though it's considerably bigger than my 370Z, it felt, at least, if not in many ways, more agile. Despite its size. I don't know, it's just beautifully balanced. When you do go into a corner with the back end starting to push you around, it feels like it's rotating right here, like right on your hip.
So, and is this the first Ferrari you've driven on the roads properly?
Well, I drove your 550 briefly, just down the road once. I drove a 458 in Spain on the road. For like an hour, but I was limited as to what I could do. And I've driven a 430 on track at Silverstone in the rain. This is definitely the most powerful car, most powerful Ferrari. And I think the first time I drove a Ferrari on the road properly-ish, like, I've probably used like 50% of its capability. And it still feels like 200% of either of my other cars.
It's a stunning car, but it is one of those ones where I was talking earlier about how, I test drove one of these and it didn't amaze me. And now I own it. I could barely imagine myself not having it, but it's because it takes so long for you to. I think really it's not the car's fault. I think it's us knowing that we're the fallible squishy bit in the middle, and you know what it's capable of, so you've got so much respect for it, where if I jump in a car now, it's got 400 horsepower, I'll be like, right, okay, foot right down, let's see what it'll do. And you're like, when it's got this much power, you're just not going to do that straight away.
Give it to a GT3 race driver or a drifter or something, and they're
or Damani.
He would be a bit more respectful because it still would be the most powerful car he's driven. Although, when I put him into the R8 for the first time, he drove it more on his first drive than I did in driving it moments before that, even though I drive it all the time. But he's a racing driver, so, that's what you get. But for mere mortals like us, it's a lot of car. But that, I think, is the best thing about it. Like, who wants to buy a car and in a week, that's it, I know everything about it. You've got nothing new to learn. It's great. You feel like you're learning something about the car and yourself.
Yes.
All the time.
It's one of the few cars I've owned, and it's something I really enjoy. Now I've been able to drive so many other cars, is that I almost feel like I'm borrowing my dad's car again. I'm like, because you're so respectful of it.
Yeah.
And every time I go out in it, I feel like I've learned something new about it, even, months and thousands of miles down the line. It's got so much depth to its character. I've rarely known a car like this. And also, I know there's lots and lots of people out there that say about, how could you use such a thing on the public roads, and it's so fast and this and the other. And I'm like, look, I get that. I totally get that. But it actually is fun and not at silly speeds. Like, it's a really enjoyable car.
We're cruising along. Like, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it. It's relatively comfortable. It's not a Rolls Royce, obviously.
No.
It's relatively comfortable, and you know me, I'm a bit deranged. I like cars to be, stiff and
rock hard.
Basically, feel like I'm struggling to keep it in a straight line and we're just cruising. In a way, it's like the Mariah Carey of cars. Like, it's got such a range.
You want one for Christmas?
That too. You've got such a range in the car. You can cruise on the motorway and munch the miles and just be completely chilled and relaxed, or you can find yourself on a beautiful Scottish road and hoon the life out of it like it's the Hoonicorn.
So, if you guys want to know a little bit more about how Anthony got on with this car when he had it, there are 1 or 2 videos from you on it.
One video,
plus your hands on the wheel driving position video as well, where this was a willing assistant. I'm sure.
One of my bugbears is when people drive like this on fast roads. Don't mind how you have the steering wheel if you're cruising along, but anyway, I made a bit of a video. It was a bit of a rant, but hopefully a bit educational, and there's some pretty cool shots of this car in it too.
So I'll leave you with a few of those shots that I'm going to steal from Anthony, and then when they're done, we'll be at Meridien and I'll tell you what we're having done. See you in a minute. YouTube transition. Woo! Okay everybody, so once again here I am back at Meridien Modena. I haven't been here for quite some time because the last car I brought here was my Ferrari 550. That was back in October, I think, and it's actually still here. I've just been to pay it a visit and see how it's getting on, and happily I can say it's getting on very well indeed, but that's more for a different video. So then, what are we doing with this? Well, nothing too dramatic if I'm lucky. The original reason this car came here was for its service, because it's simply due its next annual one. The last time this car got a service was the large one, this is the small. So that's going to include a full inspection of all of the parts of the car. It's going to be oil change, oil filter, pollen filter, and possibly a few other things as well. When this car's done, I'll let you know. Likely that's going to include brake fluid, but I'm not so sure. Cost of that, I think, is about £800 or so. I'm not certain whether it's a sort of preset service prices or not here. They're just going to do it and tell me. I previously mentioned the car now has gold wheels because I curbed the hell out of them, but behind those wheels are some very large ceramic brakes, and they haven't been behaving quite perfectly. The fronts, I believe, need new pads. The way ceramics wear is a little bit different to to normal steel. So there's still a lot of meat on the pad, but it has essentially gone. Replacements, luckily, aren't too dramatic. They're still just shy of £1,000, which is a lot of money, but not as much as some people quote for stuff on carbon ceramic equipped cars. So that is going to need doing. The rear tyres are also still just about legal, but close to needing doing, so I'll likely send some Michelin Pilot Sport 4s down here to get put on. That's going to be, again, about £500 to £600. Also, some cosmetic stuff to sort. You can see here that the leather on top of the dash has begun to lift, and it's only been getting worse as the weather has been getting hotter and the car has been used, and it's also stored outside. That's really quite frustrating. Very annoying that Ferrari still haven't learned how to stop cars doing that, but I'm hoping it's not going to be too expensive a fix. Fortunately, because it is a common problem, it's something they tend to all the time, and I'll let you know how much that winds up costing. There is also a small squeak from the anti-roll bar, I believe, and a rattle from the glove box. With luck, neither of those will be too bad to sort. The big issue, and the one that's likely going to be the most expensive, is these brake ducts at the front. These little chappies down here. Now, this one's always bugged me because I think it's slightly misaligned. However, when I took the car on track at Snetterton, it turned out these ducts were not working. I'm told this is quite a common problem with the F12, and one reason the opening duct at the front never made an appearance on any other car. The 812 doesn't have it, and I believe pretty much no other Ferrari does. Essentially, because these are nearly never needed, let's be honest here, it was 5,500 miles I had this car and drove it before they actually tried to open, and that was on track after about 7 good laps. So that's how hot you really need to get the car before they'll try and open. When they did, they realised they were seized stuck, because there's a possibility that's the first time in this car's life it's actually needed to use them. They're not cheap at all. They're, I think, 1,500 quid or so a side, possibly more. We're going to investigate what's going on with that, and that may be something I simply have to leave for the next time, because I've got a few other things going on that have also cost me a lot of money, so I do need to prioritise what we're going to do now. I have a potential plan for a way that we can fix those, but I'm going to wait and see just how bad they are before I decide what to do. Hopefully Meridien will let me know soon what the score is. Beyond that, I would like to do some cosmetic stuff with the car, largely cleaning up this front end here, which has got a bit of an odd look about it. People often remark upon my car and think it's got a lot of overspray, because here, and same on the other side, you've got lots of patches of red. That's because when Ferrari paint these cars, this, and this are all one piece. This is separate. So when this gets stone chipped, or this, it comes through as white, or the metal below here. But when this gets stone chipped, or this, it comes through red. So it looks like someone's chucked a load of red paint at the car. They think it's overspray. Actually, it's not. It's underneath all the black. So once we've worked out what we're going to do with the front, we'll hopefully have that tarted up, and it will look a little bit nicer. Guy, this car's previous owner, liked to keep that as a sort of badge of honour and a show that this car actually is used. It's a little bit of patina. I kind of get where he's coming from, but it does my head in, so I want it sorted. That then is what we're going to have done to the F12, and in the next video with this car, I'm going to tell you how much all of this has cost. As this is another sort of prototype video for our new channel, I would love all your feedback on how today's format has gone, whether you enjoy the long preamble, the talk through the car, which isn't going to happen in every video, the interaction with Anthony and so on. I'd really love all your feedback. Tell me what you think, and whether you like this new, slightly slower format of doing things, or whether you'd like video updates like this to be a little bit more to the point and direct. Let me know. As ever, thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.